The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was a constant in my world. It pulsed in time with the ache in my arm, a dull throb that radiated outwards from the IV needle, a tiny intruder in my small, pale limb. The room was a study in sterile white. White walls, white sheets, the blindingly white glare of the fluorescent lights overhead. Even the air felt sterile, devoid of any real scent, just the faint medicinal tang of antiseptic. It was a world of quiet suffering, a place where time seemed to stretch and compress in strange, unpredictable ways. Sometimes an hour felt like an eternity, and other times days blurred into one another, marked only by the changing shifts of nurses and the relentless rhythm of the machines. My name is Alara, though sometimes I wondered if I even deserved one. It felt like a label attached to a body that existed solely within these walls, a body that was poked, prodded, and examined more often than it was held or hugged. I was 7 years old, though I felt much older, burdened with a knowledge no child should have to carry. I knew about needles and bandages, about the strange metallic smell of blood, about the hushed whispers of doctors and the forced smiles of my parents. I knew about waiting, endless waiting, for the next procedure, the next round of tests, the next wave of nausea. From my bed, I could see the sliver of sky through the narrow window. It was a pale, washed-out blue today, a reflection of my own muted existence. Sometimes I imagine floating up to it, drifting away from the hospital bed, the beeping machines, the constant underlying fear. But my body, tethered by tubes and wires, always held me firmly in place. I was grounded, trapped in this sterile purgatory. There were sounds beyond the beep of the monitor, too. The soft squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum floor, the muffled announcements over the hospital PA system, the occasional distant cry of another child. And then, there was her sound. It was a sound that always seemed to cut through the white noise of the hospital, a bright, vibrant melody in a world of muted tones. Laughter. Isolde's laughter. My older sister. She was everything I wasn't. Vibrant, energetic, full of life. She was the sun, and I was the pale, flickering moon, reflecting her light but never possessing any of my own. I'd hear her laughter echoing down the hallway, sometimes accompanied by the cheerful chatter of friends, sometimes by the warm, comforting tones of my parents. They always sounded so happy when she was around. It was a different kind of happy than the strained smiles they gave me when they visited, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and something else, something I couldn't quite name. Isolde's laughter was a reminder of the life I wasn't living, the life I could never have. It was a reminder of the gap between us, a chasm that seemed to grow wider with each passing day. It was a sound that both drew me in and pushed me away, a bittersweet melody that echoed the longing in my heart. I wanted to be like her, to laugh like that, to have friends, to be the center of attention. But I knew, even at 7 years old, that it was a wish that would never come true. My purpose was different. My existence was defined by a different kind of sound, the steady rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, a constant reminder of my role, my reason for being. A donor. That's what I was, not a Lara, but a donor. The word hung in the air, heavy and cold, like a dense fog rolling in from the sea. Donor. I didn't understand it at first. It was just another word, another label like patient or Alara's room. But the way my parents said it, their voices hushed and serious, made it feel different. Important, ominous. They were sitting on the edge of my bed, their faces etched with a weariness that went beyond the usual parental concern. My mother's hand rested lightly on my arm, her touch more a formality than an expression of affection. My father stood by the window, his back to me, his posture stiff and unyielding. They had called me into the small, sterile family room, adjacent to my private room, a space meant to make these kinds of conversations easier. It didn't. It felt more like an interrogation room. Alara, my mother began, her voice trembling slightly, we need to talk to you about Isolde. My heart clenched. Isolde. Her name was always a trigger, a reminder of the perfect, healthy daughter, the daughter who shone so brightly in our family, casting me in her shadow. I knew instinctively that whatever they were about to say, it wouldn't be good for me. Isolde is very sick, my father said, finally turning to face me. His eyes, usually so distant, held a flicker of something that looked like pity? Or maybe it was just disappointment. She needs a transplant, Ilara. A very special kind of transplant. I nodded slowly, my gaze fixed on the intricate pattern of the hospital-issue blanket covering my lap. I had heard whispers of Isolde's illness before, hushed conversations between nurses, worried tones in my parents' voices. But they had always shielded me from the details, as if I were too fragile to understand. Now it seemed the shield was about to be lifted. "It's her bone marrow," my mother explained, her voice becoming more clinical, more detached. "Her body isn't producing the healthy cells she needs. She's failing, Ilara." The word hung in the air again, even heavier this time. Failing. It sounded so final, so absolute, like a machine breaking down, piece by piece. And then the connection clicked into place. I looked from my mother to my father, my eyes searching for an answer to the unspoken question that was forming in my mind. "You're a match, Ilara," my father said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "You're a perfect match for Isolde." The word match echoed in my head, cold and impersonal. Not a sister, not a daughter, but a match. A collection of cells, a set of numbers, a biological spare part. My mother reached out and took my hand again, her grip surprisingly tight. "This is a wonderful opportunity, Ilara," she said, her voice laced with a forced enthusiasm that grated on my ears. "You're going to save your sister's life." Save her sister's life. The words were supposed to make me feel heroic, important, but all I felt was a hollow emptiness, a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't about saving Isolde, not really. It was about what I was, a donor, a means to an end. "You were designed for this, Ilara," my father continued, his words precise and carefully chosen. "Your genetic makeup was specifically selected to ensure compatibility with Isolde." Designed, selected, compatibility. The language was so sterile, so devoid of any warmth or affection. It was as if they were talking about a science experiment, not their own child. I wasn't a person, I was a project, a carefully crafted solution to a medical problem. We wanted another child," my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And when Isolde got sick," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. But I understood. I understood perfectly. They hadn't wanted another child. They had wanted a donor. They had wanted a spare parts kit, a walking, talking, breathing source of healthy cells. They had wanted me, not for myself, but for what I could give. The fog in my mind thickened, obscuring everything but the cold, hard truth. I wasn't Ilara. I was a donor. And in that moment, a part of me died. The part that still believed, however faintly, that I was loved. My world was a muted palette of hospital greens and sterile whites. Isolde's was a vibrant explosion of color. While I lay in bed, tethered to machines, she was out in the world, living a life that seemed impossibly bright and full. The divide between us wasn't just a physical one, measured in hospital corridors and miles between our bedrooms. It was a chasm carved deep by years of subtle, insidious neglect, and the blatant favoritism shown towards my older sister. Isolde's laughter, which I heard echoing through the hospital halls even when she wasn't visiting me, was the soundtrack to a life I could only dream of. It was the sound of carefree joy, of friendships and adventures, of a world that welcomed her with open arms. My laughter, when it came at all, was a hesitant, fragile thing, quickly swallowed by the silence of my room. Birthdays were a stark reminder of this divide. Isolde's were celebrations, filled with balloons, presents piled high, and a house overflowing with friends and family. I'd hear the music, the excited chatter, the clinking of glasses drifting down the hallway, a painful symphony of joy that I wasn't a part of. My own birthdays were quiet affairs, a small cake, a few presents that felt obligatory, a strained smile from my parents. One year, they forgot altogether. I overheard them apologizing to each other later, their voices hushed with embarrassment, not regret. It was just a slip of the mind, they said, but it felt like a confirmation of my own insignificance. Even the simplest things highlighted the difference. Isolde had a room bursting with personality posters of her favorite bands, shelves overflowing with books, a desk covered in art supplies. It was a space that reflected her, a place where she could be herself. My room was functional, sterile. The walls were bare, the only decorations the get well cards that I received after particularly invasive procedures, their cheerful messages a stark contrast to the reality of my existence. I wasn't allowed to put up posters or personalize the space. It's easier to clean this way, the nurses said, their voices apologetic but firm. Even my own space wasn't truly mine. Meal times were another point of contrast. Isolde ate with the family at the dining table, her laughter and stories filling the room. I ate alone in my bed, the bland hospital food delivered on a tray. Sometimes my parents would bring me a special meal, a slightly less bland version of the hospital fare, but it always felt like an afterthought, a duty performed rather than an act of love. They'd sit on the edge of my bed, their attention divided between me and their phones, their conversations stilted and forced. They'd ask me about my day, but their eyes would glaze over as I described the endless rounds of tests and treatments. They weren't really interested. They were just going through the motions. Isolde went to school, had friends, participated in sports. She was a star, both academically and socially. I learned from textbooks and the occasional visit from a tutor, my world shrinking smaller and smaller. I longed for the simple things, the camaraderie of classmates, the thrill of a school dance, the joy of playing on a team. But those experiences were as far out of reach as the stars in the sky. The most painful difference, though, was the way my parents looked at us. When they looked at Isolde, their eyes shone with pride and affection. When they looked at me, they saw what? Pity? Resentment? I wasn't sure, but I knew it wasn't love, not the unconditional, all-encompassing love that they gave to Isolde. My love, I realized, was conditional. It was tied to my ability to donate, to heal, to serve a purpose. I wasn't their daughter, I was their donor. And that realization, more than any other, carved the divide between us, a chasm so wide that I wasn't sure it could ever be bridged. The sterile silence of the hospital room pressed in on me, suffocating me. The television, perched precariously on the rolling stand, flickered with images of Isolde, radiant in her graduation gown, a bright smile splitting her face. My parents stood on either side of her, beaming with pride, their eyes shining with a love that felt like a slap in the face. I watched the ceremony unfold from my bed, a prisoner in my own private purgatory, the IV drip in my arm pulsed in time with the dull ache in my bones, a constant reminder of the procedure I had just endured, another sacrifice made in the name of Isolde's health. My parents had promised to be there, to hold my hand, to whisper words of comfort, but the pull of Isolde's triumph had proved too strong. They had chosen her, as they always did. The camera zoomed in on Isolde as she crossed the stage, her name echoing through the auditorium. She accepted her diploma with a flourish, her laughter ringing out, a sharp counterpoint to the sterile silence of my room. I could almost hear my parents' cheers, their applause, their overwhelming pride in the daughter who had conquered, who had achieved. And I, the daughter who had sacrificed, who had endured, was left behind, forgotten in the sterile confines of the hospital. The bitterness rose in my throat, choking me. It wasn't just the physical pain, the exhaustion, the constant fear that gnawed at me. It was the loneliness, the crushing realization that I was invisible, a shadow in my own family. As I watched the celebration on the screen, a fierce determination ignited within me. I would not be a victim. I would not be defined by their neglect, their indifference. I would escape this suffocating existence, this endless cycle of pain and sacrifice. I would forge my own path, a path where I was valued for who I was, not for what I could give. I would become a doctor, not just to heal others, but to heal myself, to prove to them, to the world, and most importantly, to myself, that I was more than just a donor, a means to an end. I would dedicate my life to ensuring that no child would ever feel as discarded, as unseen, as I did. The graduation ceremony ended, the screen fading to black. I switched off the television, the silence in the room now deafening. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of resolve, of a newfound strength. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. and I would rise from the ashes of their neglect, stronger, more determined, and more resilient than ever before. Leaving was like shedding a skin. I packed my meager belongings, the sterile scent of the hospital clinging to my clothes like a ghost. My parents saw me off at the train station, their farewell a strange mix of relief and guilt. Isolde, healthy and vibrant, hugged me tightly, her perfume a dizzying wave of a life I'd never known. As the train pulled away, I watched their figures shrink in the distance, a knot of complicated emotions tightening in my chest. It was a goodbye, not just to them, but to a life defined by hospitals, by needles, by the constant shadow of my sister's needs. I chose a university as far away from them as possible, a bustling city on the opposite coast. It was a deliberate act of rebellion, a severing of the ties that had bound me for so long. The anonymity of the city was a balm, a cloak of invisibility that allowed me to breathe, to be just another face in the crowd. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of freedom, a heady rush of possibility. The university was a different world, a place where intellect and ambition were valued above all else. I threw myself into my studies with a ferocious intensity, fueled by a need to prove my worth, not just to my family, but to myself. The years of forced isolation had ignited a thirst for knowledge, a hunger to understand the complexities of the human body, the delicate balance between health and disease. I devoured textbooks, spent countless hours in the library, and volunteered at the university hospital, eager to absorb every bit of information I could. My brilliance wasn't just a product of my drive, it was a defiance, a refusal to be defined by my past. I excelled in every subject, my grades a testament to my resilience, my determination to break free from the mold they had cast for me. Professors were impressed by my sharp mind, my insightful questions, my unwavering dedication. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a donor, a patient, or a shadow, but as an individual, a mind with potential. But independence came at a price. Tuition was expensive, living costs even more so. I worked tirelessly to support myself, juggling a part-time job at a local bookstore with my demanding academic schedule. Sleep was a luxury I could rarely afford. Meals were often skipped, and social life was practically non-existent. There were days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, when the weight of my past and the uncertainty of my future pressed down with suffocating force. But I refused to give up. I clung to my studies, my work, my newfound independence, like a life raft in a stormy sea. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of loneliness, of overwhelming sadness. The ghost of my past lingered, whispering doubts in my ear, reminding me of the sacrifices I had made, the love I had been denied. But I fought back, pushing the doubts aside, focusing on the present, on the future I was building for myself. With each passing day, I grew stronger, more resilient. The city became my sanctuary, the university my haven. I made friends, cautiously at first, then with a growing sense of trust. They were people who knew nothing of my past, who saw me for who I was, not what I had been. Their friendship was a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone, that I was worthy of love and connection. And slowly, gradually, I began to heal. The scars of my past remained, but they no longer defined me. I was a Laura, not just a donor, not just a daughter, but a woman with a mind of her own, a future of her own making. I was free. The city's vibrant energy became a part of me, a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of my childhood. I found myself drawn to the bustling markets, the lively cafes, the parks filled with laughter and music. It was a world so different from the one I had known, a world where I could be myself, without the weight of expectations or the shadow of my sister's needs. Friendships bloomed slowly, tentatively at first. I was wary, guarded, unsure if I could truly trust anyone. But my classmates, drawn to my quiet intensity and sharp wit, persisted. There was Maya, with her infectious enthusiasm and boundless energy, who dragged me to concerts and late-night study sessions. And David, with his gentle humor and thoughtful insights, who challenged my perspectives and encouraged me to open up about my past. They became my chosen family, a support system I never knew I craved. Maya especially was a force of nature. She saw through my carefully constructed walls, recognizing the vulnerability beneath my reserved exterior. She teased me, pushed me out of my comfort zone, and taught me how to laugh again, a genuine, unburdened laugh that came from deep within. She celebrated my successes, commiserated with my failures, and never judged me for my past. With Maya, I could be Alara, not just the brilliant student or the quiet observer, but a friend, a confidant, a person worthy of love and belonging. David, on the other hand, offered a different kind of support. He was quiet and introspective, a listener rather than a talker. He had a way of making me feel seen, understood, without ever uttering a word. He challenged me to think critically, to question my assumptions, to explore the deeper meaning behind the science I was studying. He saw my compassion, my empathy for others, and encouraged me to embrace it, to let it guide my path in medicine. Beyond friendships, I found mentors in my professors, particularly Dr. Anya Sharma, a renowned surgeon with a reputation for both brilliance and compassion. She saw my potential, my drive, and took me under her wing. She pushed me to excel, to think beyond the textbooks, to connect with patients on a human level. She taught me that medicine wasn't just about treating diseases, it was about healing people, both physically and emotionally. Working at the university hospital solidified this understanding. Interacting with patients, especially children, brought back memories of my own time in hospitals, but this time, I was on the other side. I wasn't the scared, vulnerable child. I was the one offering comfort, hope, and healing. I saw the fear in their eyes, the pain etched on their faces, and I understood it in a way that no one else could. My experiences, though painful, had given me a unique perspective, an ability to connect with patients on a deeper level. I found myself drawn to the pediatric ward, spending extra time with the young patients, reading them stories, playing games, simply being there for them. I understood their fear of needles, their confusion about their illnesses, their longing for normalcy. I could offer them not just medical expertise, but also empathy, compassion, and a genuine understanding of what they were going through. These interactions were healing for me too. Each child I comforted, each smile I elicited was a small victory over my past. It was a way of reclaiming my own childhood, of rewriting the narrative of my life. I was no longer defined by my pain, I was defined by my ability to heal others. Slowly, gradually, I was building a new identity, piece by piece. I was Alara, the brilliant student, the loyal friend, the compassionate caregiver. I was no longer a donor, a patient, a shadow. I was a person, whole and complete, with a past that had shaped me, but did not define me. I was free to be myself, to pursue my dreams, to build a life filled with purpose, meaning, and genuine connection. The healing had begun, not just for my patients, but for myself. The phone rang, a jarring intrusion on my quiet evening. I glanced at the caller ID, a familiar number from a past I had tried to bury. My parents. A sigh escaped my lips as I hesitated, my finger hovering over the answer button. Years of distance, of carefully constructed boundaries, threatened to crumble with a single press. I almost didn't answer. The old wounds, though healed, still ached with a dull throb, but a flicker of curiosity, a sense of obligation, perhaps compelled me to pick up. Hello? My voice was cool, measured, a shield against the emotions that threatened to surface. Ilara? Is that you, sweetheart? My mother's voice, tinged with a nervous excitement, grated on my ears. It was the same voice that had once praised Isolde's achievements while dismissing my pain. Mother, I acknowledged her with a curt nod, though she couldn't see it. To what do I owe the pleasure? A nervous laugh crackled through the phone. Oh, Ilara, you know you don't have to be so formal with us. We're your parents. The irony wasn't lost on me. Parents. The very people who had treated me more like a medical resource than a daughter. What do you want, Mother? I repeated, my voice firm, brooking no nonsense. Well, she hesitated. Your father and I were just thinking about you. It's been a while since we've heard from you, and you wanted to make sure I haven't forgotten about my obligations? I finished her sentence, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. A long silence followed, punctuated only by the faint hum of the phone line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't ignite my anger. Alara, please, she finally said, her voice softening. We know we haven't been the best parents. We made mistakes, and we're truly sorry. We just want to reconnect with you, to be a part of your life. Her words were like a balm, soothing yet unsettling. A part of me longed to believe her, to let go of the past, to embrace the possibility of a normal family relationship. But another part, the part that remembered the years of neglect, the casual cruelty, the blatant favoritism, remained skeptical. I appreciate the apology, Mother, I said, my voice carefully neutral, but I'm busy with my studies, my work. I don't have much time for, uh, I paused, searching for the right word. For anything else. Of course, she said quickly, eager to avoid another confrontation. We understand. Just know that we love you, Alara, and we're proud of the woman you've become. Love, pride, words that had been so conspicuously absent from my childhood now flowed easily from her lips. Ironic, wasn't it? Thank you, Mother, I said, my voice flat. I have to go now. And with that, I ended the call. The phone slipped from my hand, landing on the table with a soft thud. I sat there for a long moment, the echoes of their voices swirling in my head. Love, pride, empty words, or a genuine attempt at reconciliation? I wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. I was in control now. I set the boundaries. I dictated the terms. And that in itself was a kind of victory. The ER was a symphony of controlled chaos. The air crackled with tension, the rhythmic beeping of machines a frantic counterpoint to the shouted orders and hurried footsteps. I moved through the controlled pandemonium with practiced ease, my mind focused, my movements precise. A trauma case had just come in, a multi-car pileup on the highway. My role was triage, assessing the patients, prioritizing their injuries, directing the flow of care. The first patient was a young woman, her face pale and contorted in pain, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. I quickly assessed her injuries, barking orders to the nurses, preparing her for x-rays. My mind was a whirlwind of medical protocols, differential diagnoses, treatment plans. There was no room for emotion, no time for anything but the immediate needs of the patient. The second patient was a man, his breathing shallow, his pulse weak. He had suffered a head injury, and I worked quickly to stabilize him, inserting a breathing tube, monitoring his vital signs. My hands moved with a speed and precision honed by years of training, each action deliberate, each decision calculated. It wasn't until the third patient was brought in that the world tilted on its axis. She was unconscious, her face obscured by blood and debris. As the nurses cleaned her up, I saw Isolde. My breath hitched. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden silence in my mind. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it was her. Her face, though battered and bruised, was unmistakable. And then I saw the fourth patient, my mother. Her eyes were closed, her face ashen. A wave of nausea washed over me, a cold dread creeping up my spine. I stumbled back, my hand gripping the edge of the gurney for support. It was them, all of them, my family. The initial shock gave way to a strange sense of detachment. It was as if I were observing the scene from a distance, a detached observer watching a play unfold. These weren't my parents, my sister. They were patients, trauma victims, medical cases. My training kicked in, overriding the wave of emotions that threatened to engulf me. I forced myself to focus, to compartmentalize, to revert to the clinical detachment that had become my survival mechanism. I was a doctor, and these were my patients. I barked orders, directing the medical team, my voice firm, my demeanor professional. I needed to know the extent of their injuries, the severity of their condition. I needed to save them, not because they were my family, but because it was my job, because it was what I did. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The family that had discarded me, that had treated me as nothing more than a donor, was now in my hands. Their lives, their futures rested on my skill, my expertise, my ability to remain objective in the face of overwhelming emotion. It was a twist of fate so cruel, so ironic, that it almost made me laugh. Almost. But there was no time for laughter. There was only the urgent, desperate need to save lives. Their lives. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. They were my family, yes, but they were also strangers. People who had chosen Isolde, their first daughter, over me, their second, time and time again. People who had relegated me to the role of donor, a means to an end rather than a daughter, worthy of love and belonging. Now, their lives were in my hands. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. My mind was a battlefield, the opposing forces of duty and resentment clashing with a ferocity that left me reeling. My Hippocratic oath, the solemn vow I had taken to heal and to serve, pulled me in one direction. These were patients, human beings in desperate need of medical attention. Regardless of their past actions, regardless of their relationship to me, they deserved the best possible care. It was my duty, my responsibility as a doctor to provide that care. But the resentment, the deep-seated anger that had simmered beneath the surface for so many years, tugged at me with equal force. They had abandoned me, neglected me, treated me as an afterthought. Why should I save them? Why should I risk my own emotional well-being, my hard-earned peace, for people who had never shown me the same consideration? A part of me, a dark, vengeful part, wanted to walk away, to let them face the consequences of their actions, to experience the same sense of abandonment, of helplessness that I had endured for so long. The hospital protocols were clear. Doctors were not allowed to treat their own family members. The emotional entanglement, the potential for bias, made it a clear conflict of interest. I could recuse myself, hand their cases over to other doctors, and walk away. It would be the easiest thing to do. It would protect me from the emotional fallout, the inevitable pain of confronting my past. But could I? Could I stand by and watch them suffer, knowing that I had the skills, the knowledge, the ability to save them? Could I live with the guilt, the what-ifs, if I chose to walk away and something happened to them? The faces of my patients, the children I had comforted, the lives I had touched flashed through my mind. They were my motivation, my inspiration. I had chosen this path, the path of healing, of service, not for them, but for myself, to prove my worth, to make a difference in the world, to ensure that no one else would suffer as I had. And yet, here I was, faced with the ultimate test. Could I extend that compassion, that empathy, to the very people who had caused me so much pain? Could I rise above my resentment, my anger, and treat them with the same care and dedication that I showed to every other patient? The internal struggle raged within me, tearing me apart. Duty versus resentment, compassion versus anger, the past versus the present. I was caught in a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, unable to find a clear path forward. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the chaos of the ER, the faces of my family, the whispers of my past. I focused on my breathing, trying to find a moment of calm in the storm within me. I thought of Dr. Sharma, my mentor, her words echoing in my mind. Compassion is not weakness, Alara. It is strength. It is the ability to see the humanity in everyone, even those who have hurt you. And then I made a decision, not a decision driven by love or forgiveness, but a decision driven by professionalism, by duty, by the unwavering belief in the power of healing. I would treat them. I would do everything in my power to save their lives. Not for them, but for myself, to prove that I was more than they had ever believed me to be, to show them and myself the true meaning of a healer. And in that decision, a fragile seed of peace began to sprout in the midst of the turmoil. The OR was a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the ER. Here, the atmosphere was one of focused intensity, a quiet hum of efficiency. The bright lights illuminated the sterile field, casting long shadows that danced across the surgical instruments laid out on the tray. I stood at the head of the operating table, my hands gloved, my gaze steady. Before me lay my mother, her face still pale, her breathing shallow. The monitor displayed a complex array of numbers, each one telling a story of her condition, her vulnerabilities. I took a deep breath, centering myself, pushing aside the swirling emotions that threatened to cloud my judgment. This wasn't my mother on the table. This was a patient, a woman with a critical head injury. My focus narrowed, honed by years of training, countless hours in the operating room. My hands, guided by instinct and expertise, moved with a precision that belied the turmoil within me. "Scalpel," I said, my voice calm and steady. The instrument was placed in my hand, cool and smooth against my gloved skin. With a swift, clean incision, I opened the scalp, exposing the bone beneath. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, a familiar aroma that usually didn't faze me. But today, it was different. Today, the scent carried a different weight, a different meaning. Drill! I called out. The high-pitched whine of the drill filled the room as I carefully, meticulously created burr holes in the skull. My eyes were fixed on the monitor, watching the intracranial pressure, monitoring for any signs of distress. Every movement was calculated, every decision weighed. I was walking a tightrope, balancing the delicate balance between life and death. The procedure was delicate, intricate. I worked with a focus that bordered on obsession. My mind clear, my hands steady. I knew the anatomy of the brain intimately, every fold, every fissure, every delicate vessel. I knew the risks, the potential complications, the fine line between success and failure. Retractor, I said, and the surgical field was widened, revealing the injured area. The sight of the damaged tissue, the blood pooling beneath the dura, was jarring. But I didn't flinch. I had seen worse. I had handled worse. This was just another case, another life in my hands. I used suction to clear the blood, revealing the source of the bleeding. A ruptured blood vessel, a fragile thread of life torn apart. I worked quickly, carefully, using microsurgical instruments to repair the damage, to stem the flow of blood. It was a painstaking process, requiring patience, precision, and unwavering focus. Hours passed. The only sounds in the OR, the rhythmic beep of the monitors, the soft hiss of the anesthesia machine, the occasional clink of instruments. I worked tirelessly, my body aching, my eyes burning, but my mind clear, my resolve unwavering. I was a surgeon, a healer, and I would not give up. Finally, the bleeding was stopped, the damaged tissue repaired. I meticulously closed the dura, sutured the scalp, and stepped back from the operating table, my body exhausted, but my mind at peace. The procedure had been a success. My mother was stable. The next day, it was Isolde's turn. Her injuries were different, more complex. She had multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and a collapsed lung. The surgery was long and arduous, a marathon of medical interventions. I worked alongside a team of specialists, each of us focused on our area of expertise, each of us working in sync like a well-oiled machine. I repaired her fractures, stabilized her breathing, and addressed the internal bleeding. It was a complex puzzle, a jigsaw of broken bones and damaged tissues. But I was a surgeon, a problem solver, and I would not rest until she was stable, until her life was no longer in immediate danger. The OR became my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the emotional turmoil, the weight of the past. Here, I was not Alara, the neglected daughter. I was Dr. Alara, the skilled surgeon, the healer. My focus was absolute, my concentration unwavering. I was in control, master of my domain, wielding the tools of my trade with precision and expertise. By the time I stepped out of the OR, hours later, exhausted but satisfied, Isolde was stable, her vital signs strong. I had done my job. I had saved her life, just as I had saved my mother's. Not out of love, not out of forgiveness, but out of duty, out of professionalism, out of the unwavering belief in the power of healing. And in that act of healing, I found a measure of healing for myself. The recovery room was a sterile, quiet space, a world away from the frantic energy of the ER and the focused intensity of the OR. My mother lay in bed, her eyes closed, her breathing even. The monitors beeped softly, reassuringly. She was stable. I had saved her, not out of love, but out of duty. A duty I had fulfilled with cold, clinical precision. When she woke, her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her gaze. She looked around the room, her brow furrowed. Then her eyes landed on me. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by a flicker of something. Was it gratitude, relief, or something else entirely? Ilara. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. I nodded, my expression carefully neutral. You're awake, Mother. You're recovering. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling slightly. I hesitated for a moment, then took her hand in mine. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you for saving me. I didn't respond. What could I say? Thank you for acknowledging my existence. Thank you for finally seeing me, not as a donor, but as a doctor. The words felt hollow, inadequate. You're welcome, I said finally, my voice flat. The conversation was short, stilted. She asked about Isolde, her voice laced with worry. I told her that Isolde was also recovering, that she had also undergone surgery, that she was stable. My mother's relief was palpable. Later, I visited Isolde. She was awake, alert, her usual vibrant energy dimmed by pain and medication. She looked at me, her eyes searching, questioning. Alara, she said, her voice hoarse. They told me you saved us. I met her gaze, my expression unwavering. I did what any doctor would do, I said, my voice even. A flicker of understanding crossed her face, followed by a wave of emotion, guilt, shame, remorse. I couldn't be sure. I I didn't know, she stammered, her voice trembling. I didn't know what they did to you. I raised an eyebrow, my silence a pointed question. They they kept it from me, she continued, her voice barely audible. They said they said it was for the best, that I was too young to understand. Understand what, Isolde? I asked, my voice cold. Understand that I was created for you? That my existence was defined by your needs? Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't offer her any comfort. She had to face the truth, the reality of what had happened. I'm so sorry, Alara, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I looked at her, my eyes unwavering. Sorry doesn't change the past, Isolde, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It doesn't erase the years of neglect, the years of pain. It doesn't undo what they did. She nodded, her head bowed in shame. I know, she whispered. I know. My parents' remorse was palpable. They visited me every day, their eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and gratitude. They apologized repeatedly, their words tumbling over each other, desperate to convey their regret. We were wrong, Elara, my father said, his voice choked with emotion. We made a terrible mistake. We didn't see you, not really. We were so focused on Isolde, on her illness, that we neglected you. And for that, we are truly sorry. My mother echoed his sentiments, her voice trembling with tears. Please, Alara, she pleaded. Can you ever forgive us? I looked at them, their faces etched with regret, their eyes filled with a desperate longing for forgiveness. But forgiveness wasn't mine to give. They had to live with their choices, with the consequences of their actions. I don't know, I said finally, my voice flat. Maybe someday, but not today. Their faces fell, their shoulders slumped. They understood. They understood that they had broken something precious, something that could never be fully repaired. They had lost my trust, my love, perhaps forever. And in that loss, they were finally beginning to understand the true cost of their choices. The confrontation wasn't a shouting match, a dramatic explosion of pent-up anger. It was quiet, almost clinical, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. I sat across from my parents and Isolde in a small, sterile room, the same kind of room where I had learned the truth about my existence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'm not here to forgive you, I began, my voice steady, unwavering. Forgiveness is a gift, and it's one you don't deserve. My mother gasped, tears welling in her eyes. Isolde looked down, shame etched on her face. My father remained silent, his gaze fixed on his hands. You made your choices, I continued, my voice even. You chose Isolde. You chose her health, her happiness, her life. And in doing so, you chose to neglect me, to treat me as less than human, as nothing more than a donor. I paused, taking a deep breath. I survived. I thrived. I became a doctor, not because of you, but in spite of you. I healed you, not because you are my family, but because it is my duty, my calling. I have proven my worth, not to you, but to myself. I stood up, the conversation over. I'm done, I said, my voice clear and strong. I'm done with the past. I'm done with the resentment. I'm moving on. A sense of peace settled over me, a quiet calm that I had never experienced before. The weight of the past, the burden of resentment, had finally lifted. I had said my truth. I had acknowledged my pain, and I had released it. I didn't need their forgiveness, I had found my own. The hospital, once a place of fear and suffering, now felt like a sanctuary. I walked through the corridors, no longer a ghost haunting its halls, but a healer, a beacon of hope. In the pediatric ward, a small boy with bright, curious eyes looked up at me from his bed. He was scared, his small hand clutching a worn teddy bear. I sat beside him, my smile warm and genuine. "What's your name?" I asked softly. "Leo," he whispered. "Hi, Leo," I said. "I'm Dr. Elora, and I'm here to help you get better." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. And in that moment, I knew that I had found my purpose. I was a healer, not just of bodies, but of hearts. I was a doctor, a friend, a confidant. I was a Lara, whole and complete, finally free. And in that freedom, I had found my true calling.